Hello and welcome to the fifth in a new series of podcasts from the Entrepreneurs Forum, Talking Future, where we talk to Northeast entrepreneurs about their work, their lives and especially their views on the future and how they're innovating as they plan ahead. I'm Yvonne Bell and today I'm talking to Laura Weaving, Managing Director of Duo Global Consulting. Before launching Duo in 2014, Laura set up and managed several other high-growth international businesses, providing her with the understanding that, in order to drive strategic change that has lasting impact, it's essential to activate change at every level. This ethos runs throughout Duo's work. As Managing Director of the business, Laura not only leads Duo's vision and growth strategy, but she delivers strategic insight for Duo's clients, helping businesses of all sizes create sustained cultural change. Good morning, Laura.
Morning.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Can we set the scene for now? Because I'd like to find out really a little bit of background from yourself about where you came from and what set your passion alight for this kind of industry.
Yeah. Well, it probably started from quite a young age. My dad worked in organisational development, and I sort of became his guinea pig with some of the things that he did. He was a Myers-Briggs practitioner and sort of tested out some of that stuff on me as I was growing up. So I think really the seed got embedded then. And then I started working for a recruitment agency, and that's sort of where the passion for recruitment came from. But I became a little bit disillusioned with that industry and the sort of the notion really of placing bums on seats, so to speak. And we were having lots of clients sort of approach, well, I was having lots of conversations with clients saying, yeah, we absolutely need to recruit people into this business, but what do we do after that? What if people leave? How do we actually set up the business to find the right people in the first place? We're recruiting quite proactively, but then I don't think our culture is quite there. And the work that I was doing at the time didn't allow me to do any of that. And it felt like there was a need for something more holistic that actually could be part of the whole employee journey, so to speak, versus a very small part and then clients sort of being left or businesses not really knowing what to do outside of the recruitment process. I suppose that's really where it came from.
I suppose at that point, once they get the client, once you've handed over the new person, how do they know they're actually going to fit in? Is that where you come in now?
Yeah, so we actually do the whole piece. We help clients look at what they need to hire from a recruitment perspective and actually help them put a strategy together. So we don't work the way a recruitment agency does, where we're sort of placing individuals, but we really help them look at what does that strategy look like, from how do they actually identify what they want, because often what you think you want and actually what you really need is different. So how do they identify that, and then how are they setting up their business to actually attract that right person? How are they predicting that, and then what do they do once they're in the business?
So you must have thought it was a really good idea, because you know, to just jump out of one industry which you probably had a salary from and suddenly go into your own. How did you do that? Was it like a leap of faith?
I think it was when I was living in the States. So I moved to America and had set up a business for a previous company that I worked for, set up a division out there. And again, I was just hearing more and more of those conversations, but there wasn't scope to do that in the business that I was in at the time. And it was a leap of faith, but it was also, I'm hearing there's something here. I'm hearing this time and time again from businesses that I'm working with. And I believed, I think at my core, that was the right model. I sort of stopped believing in that just a placement approach. So I think there was a little bit of a value and a belief fit with what I was doing, but also just hearing from the market, that's what we're missing, and not really seeing a lot of other solutions that were able to solve that.
So when you started up, were you just on your own then?
Yes. Yeah, so I started up in the States when I was living there. Was lucky that I had formed some real sort of strategic partnerships when I was out there. Had formed a partnership with a business that did sort of very complementary stuff to what I was looking to do. So they did, obviously in the States, you know, health insurance is a huge thing. They did health insurance, they did outsourced payroll. Again, it's commonplace for US businesses to outsource their payroll. And they did some sort of HR legal support. And so although I started on my own, that partnership with that business really opened doors, because they had the exact clients that I was looking for, but they didn't do what we did. So it was sort of quite a natural fit to start with that and really build up some collaboration.
And when did you come back to the Northeast?
So I started the business, and then it was about 4 months later that circumstances came that I was going to move home. And to be honest, the business out there, because of the partnerships that we had with that company, it became sort of self-scalable almost, that they were able to work with the clients face to face and drive the inquiries to us. And it was something that was then able to be managed remotely. So I moved back to the Northeast sort of towards the end of 2014 and set up here.
And how have you seen the company change since 2014? Did you just start looking around for new customers, or were you still able to do the remote stuff?
So we still grew the US market. It's still a part of our business now. And I was traveling there sort of once a quarter to do face-to-face stuff with clients. But they are all really receptive to doing virtual stuff. So that remained. And then it was really about building in the Northeast. And to be honest, a lot of the clients that I'd worked with previously were still there. I think I'm a firm believer that when you build good relationships and relationships with people who trust you, that is something that you can revisit years and years in advance, because people trust that when you come back to them with something, they want to listen to it. So there was a lot of that. And then really just forming good, got a lot of external advice, a lot of sort of working with people on referrals. I knew that model had worked for us in the US, so why would that not work here? What businesses are there that are doing things that might be complementary to what we do, and how do we partner up on that? So that really was a big part of the strategy initially.
Yeah. And were there any obstacles then?
Yes, and I think there still is a little bit, but I think the obstacle is that now the business isn't as focused on the recruitment side now, and I'm sure we'll come to that. But initially, although lots of businesses don't like using the traditional sort of recruitment agency model, they've become they've almost become very comfortable with that, because it's what they've done for years and years and years. So there definitely was an initial, oh, you're proposing something different. Well, I don't know how we feel about that. It's going to require a change. Yeah. And I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve here when we were talking about culture, and organizational change, was something that a few years back, it wasn't as well known. I think in the US, they were a little bit ahead with a lot of that stuff. So there was definitely an education piece, I suppose, around, we had to do education pieces around, why is this important? Why is that? People saw, and I think to an extent still do sometimes, see the culture pieces, oh, it's the nice to have. It's the, we'll stick a pool table in the office and it'll all be fine. Yeah. And actually, it was that education piece around, no, this is absolutely strategic. And if you get this right, it will impact performance. It will drive up profits. It will drive business growth. It was that linkage, so that people really saw it as, this isn't an option. This is actually something we need to do if we're going to scale our business, versus it being nice to have.
Just getting back to, you said your father did certain tests on you. You were the guinea pig. Are these sort of equivalent? And I've heard the term behavioural maps that you do. Yeah. And now I just want you to explain what these are. And are they equivalent to things like psychometric testing that we did in the 2000s in our businesses?
Yeah. So Myers-Briggs was what my dad was a practitioner of. So things like Myers-Briggs, DISC, Insights, they're all personality profiles. and some of them, sometimes people call them psychometric testing as well, although the psychometric testing piece is wider. What we do is behavior versus personality. Now, we have clients that use both. I'm able to do both. So in the business, we will still sometimes do personality profiling for people, but we always advise behavior if you've got a choice, or behavior in addition to. And the reason personality is static. So as an example with the Myers-Briggs piece, my dad did my Myers-Briggs profile when I was probably about 8 or 9, and he did it again at 28, and it was exactly the same.
So you hadn't changed a lot.
No, and intrinsically, that's what happens with personality. It's pretty static. Well, the challenge for that when it comes to businesses, it's almost like it's interesting to know, but you can't really influence it. So from that perspective, it's not that useful if you want to influence people to change or influence people to up-level their performance. It's very difficult to do that through personality. So that's where the behavioural stuff comes in, because behaviour is contextually based. So, for example, if we did your behavioural profile, Yvonne, and we did it from you from a personal standpoint, and then we did one with you from a work standpoint, the likelihood is there would be intrinsic differences because you behave often differently in different contexts with different people, at work, at home. And that's really the basis of the behavioural map that we created. It's actually based on meta programs. So anyone who's ever done neuro-linguistic programming, the meta programs that sit underneath NLP are behavioural patterns. And we did a lot of training around that. And that's really where we put together the behavioural map. So it's actually used to identify the behaviours that, for example, you want in a role, and then what behaviours, say you're using it from a recruitment standpoint, we have clients where we'll help them identify the behaviours that are needed in a particular role in their business. And those behaviours will be different depending on the role you're recruiting for. And then we map applicants against that behavioural map. And it actually allows us to predict how somebody's going to behave and therefore their level of performance before they recruit them into the business. But equally, you can use it in the business. You know, if you're a manager and you're finding that you can't get someone's performance just isn't where it needs to be, you can run this behavioural map and it'll tell you normally there's something that you're not doing to manage that person correctly.
Can I just ask at that point then, how receptive are the employees to being tested like this? I mean, you know, your dad did it for you when you were 8 and 28, but it's your dad. But what about if your employer does these tests? Are people generally, do they warm to it, or do they find it a bit intrusive, or what?
Normally we have a real great reception to it. It's all in the setup, I think, like anything. The great thing with behaviours is there's no right or wrong. There isn't a behaviour that we would say to a client, oh, you absolutely don't want that. It's all dependent on culture, it's all dependent on role, and every business would have a mix of all of the behavioural patterns. It's just that there may be one or two that are particularly tailored to a certain role. So as an example, one of the behavioural pattern groupings is around motivation, and one of them is an achievement motivation and a goal focus. If you were recruiting, for example, a out-and-out salesperson that's going to be working in a target-driven environment, you wouldn't want to recruit somebody who didn't have an achievement and a goal focus. But that doesn't mean that you wouldn't recruit somebody, say, for example, into another role in your business. You were going to recruit somebody into your finance team. You wouldn't look for the same thing. So there's no right or wrong. And I think that's the key piece with this, because we see so many businesses using these, whether you use personality profiling or you use behavioural profiling, wrong, where if somebody comes out as a certain type of profile, they're automatically disqualified. That's not how we use this. We use this around, if someone is this way, you then need to tailor your management approach in this way. It doesn't mean that they're the wrong person. It just means they require a different approach.
We used to do all the psychometric testing, and we I think our staff had sort of, some of our staff who were with us had the Myers-Briggs things, and I found them fascinating, because actually they were very, very close to what you got. You know, they weren't behavioural, so they were like what you're saying. They were the other side. They were the actual person, not the behaviour of that person. But sometimes they told you how they would behave, and they often did. So if you didn't actually take what their word was, and you just went ahead and got them anyway, well, you kind of were going with your eyes wide open, but it didn't always work, and we fell for it sometimes. So very interesting stuff, though.
It's fascinating. We've got quite a few clients that are now using it for clients. Yeah, and it's really interesting because it actually allows you to totally tailor how you work with that client to that, and they're seeing amazing results because they're actually able to give the client what they want, and often the client can't articulate it. You know what it's like when it's you yourself. It's almost like, well, I can't really articulate what I'm looking for,
what I want.
Just need it to feel like this. So that's a whole other experience.
Yeah. So what would you say in businesses are the sort of cultural essential behaviours? Is there anything within the business that you say they must be there, otherwise it's not going to work?
It's all tailored to the business.
So it just depends on the business, isn't it?
100%. It's no, it's tailored to what do you want to do. So when we work on values, so we help businesses create values for their business, and then we ladder those values back into what does that mean from a behavioral standpoint. And as an example, you might have a business, and most of the businesses we work with are scaling. So most of them have a piece around, we need people who are open to change. So that would be an essential behavior of their culture. But you might have businesses where there isn't a lot of change. And, there's, for example, some professional services firms, they don't drive a lot of change, in which case that wouldn't be a cultural pillar for them.
Right, I get you, yeah. So culture is normally based on a team thing, isn't it? You have that feeling of a type of business or within the business. So when people are scattered, like they have been in the last 6 to 8 months, how do you bring that together? How do you have the same thing? Does it work? Can you still build the culture if you haven't got the tennis table? If you haven't got that thing that brings people together.
Yeah, it's funny, we were talking about that yesterday with a client. And again, I think it's all about drilling back to what are the core things that you want in your culture, and what was maybe some of the rituals that happened in your business that displayed those. So as an example, we were talking about small things like, for example, in lots of businesses, you might have something around when we've got a client and they do like a tea round. So they'll make a cup of tea for everyone in the business. And actually one part of their onboarding pack is that everybody in the business gets a mug with their initial on it. And it sounds like a very small thing, but it's a real integral part of their team-centric culture. We were talking about, for example, even once people are back in the office, the likelihood that someone's going to do a tea round for everybody, where they're touching everybody's cups, is unlikely in the current circumstance. So taking that example, it was like, okay, but what's at the core of that? Well, at the core of that is a team ethos, wanting to do something for your colleagues, wanting to give them, for a cup of tea off somebody else. It's often just that piece of, oh, well, thanks, you made me a cup of tea. What's at the core of that? And then how do you replicate that either when you get back in the office or virtually in a different way? So it might be, for example, if you're virtual, well, how you recognize that sort of support for your colleagues might be taking time out in your day to check in with somebody. It might be doing a Zoom call where everybody has a virtual cup of tea together. So it's really about, and we're doing a lot of this work with clients currently, because some are transitioning back to the office and they've got some people working from home and some in the office. Some are still working from home completely. Others are completely back in the office. Whatever it is, we've just got to look at what's at the core of your culture, and then how do we put rituals, pillars, activities around that still drive that element, but they drive it in a different way.
So it's just you've just got to think outside the box, as they say. Think again. So I mean, within teams as well, they're sort of built up of introverted and extroverted individuals. how leaders sort of get these people to work together, because you need them all, but you can't always get them to be this on the same mindset. How do you do that? Is there a way of doing it?
Yeah, and often it's understanding the intricacies underneath that. In say we take, so as an example, introverted, extroverted, so that's actually one of the 4 Myers-Briggs categories. Underneath both, there's probably about 10 behaviors that sit underneath that, and that sort of brings us back to that piece around why behavior is easier to use from a management perspective. Because if you just take an extroverted personality versus an introverted personality, it can seem very complicated. But if you actually drill it down to what are the behaviors that are different, and then how do we then just manage that between us? And we talk about, when you're working in a team, it's all about creating win-win interactions. So one side has to flex a little bit and the other side has to flex a little bit, but you can do lots of different things, even down to how you sit people in your office. So if you've got, for example, people who are more introverted, the likelihood is, from a behavioural perspective, they will tend to be more independent workers. They might want to zone out a little bit when they're working. They might want to stick headphones in so they don't have that distraction. They won't necessarily want to be constantly interrupted. So think about your office placement. If you've got some people that they need that independent zone out time in order to be productive, don't sit them in the middle of an open plan office where people are shouting over the top of them constantly. Sit those people more on the peripheral, because actually that might be better for them from a productivity standpoint. Equally, if you've got people that are really sort of extroverted, and then if we take the behavioural piece, they're more of a sort of proximity worker, where they are productive through voicing ideas with other people just jumping in with input. Put them in a space where you've maybe got 4 or 5 of those people sat close together. So again, it's sort of taking a step back and looking at your team from a strategic angle, and looking at it from, again, often people say to us, oh, well, the cultural stuff, it's all about creating a nice work environment, isn't it? And for us, that's a byproduct. It's actually not. It's about creating an environment where people are productive and they perform. And that example is exactly that. Taking a step back and making something as small as a change of where people sit in your office will change the productivity levels of your team. Yeah. So it's really just taking that step back and looking at it and saying, how do we need to work with this, versus just going on autopilot and doing it the way you've always done it. Ultimately, there's always ways to change how you do things. And a lot of that, if we were to do it, a lot of it would be, let's take the people in your business that are amazing. Let's take the people that are your highest performers. Let's map them. Let's see what are the behaviors that drive that. And then we look at how do we recruit more of that? Or, what are your clients doing that are different? What are your competitors doing that are different? Or what behaviors are intrinsic in where you want to go? And I mean, we've had clients where, so we've got one client, construction company, they went from about 30 million and they're about 60 million now in only 18 months. And a lot of the work we did was actually getting them to understand what were the behaviors behind their success, because then you can emulate it and you can build it, versus lots of businesses that don't really know what's made them so successful. It's almost like, well, we just kind of got there. So it's drilling it back to that basic stuff, and then how do you manage that and duplicate it?
And is that where you come in? Is that how you advise them? And obviously, from what you've just said there, you're very passionate about the product of your business, but how do you make a business of that?
So we work at every level. So normally the first layer would be, we would sit down with the leadership team and we'd understand what they were looking to do from a strategic standpoint. So what's your goals for the next 1-3 years? If you're gonna, for example, do an acquisition, we need to know that, because you need to look at how the two cultures of the two businesses work. If you're going to grow dramatically, we need to know that, because that's going to change how your team work. So we'd actually look at the strategic elements. Then we'd sort of dial those back and say, right, okay, for those to happen, what needs to happen with your team? What needs to happen with your managers of your teams? And we'd go through each layer, and we do, depending on what what they're working on. We either work with managers, and we might be working on like we've got a client currently, we're doing a 12-month management program for them, because they promoted a lot of people that didn't have any formal management experience, and that's actually preventing the business from growing because they're not managing appropriately. Down to, we will actually work with the people in the business. So we do things like, we call it the culture club, and we put together a cross section of people across the business into a group, and monthly we facilitate a session with them around looking at key things that maybe aren't working in the business currently and getting their input into new improvements. So although we're not sat in their office every day watching the behaviour, by doing the behavioural profiles of everybody, we can that tells us so much information. By doing things like culture groups or training even with the team, we're always watching people, so we can see whenever we deliver training, it's always one of us delivering the training, and then we always have an additional person just watching, because we can see so much from that, and then listening to what the managers are saying. So we gather data, essentially, I suppose, from lots of different angles to really get a picture of what's happening in that business. And then how do we put in place solutions that drive that, versus we don't have a sort of one size fits all, we'll take every business through this program. We really tailor the solutions that we have to whatever the challenge is within that business and what they're seeing with their people.
So how do you see this changing in the next 5 to 10 years? Obviously, we've had a big change this year, which nobody could have forecast. But can you think ahead and forecast what our businesses will be culturally like in the next 5 or 10 years? Will they all have table tennis tables and, pool tables, or will they just have a core of good practice? Because that's what you're after in a business, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're going to see autonomy and ownership elevating. One thing I think this has proven, and when we've been talking with business owners and leaders over the last 6 months, it's almost like this unspoken trust has been developed between them and their team, that actually I think a lot of businesses that previously would never have thought about virtual working, because there was almost this unspoken, well, will people actually work, or will this sit with Netflix on in the background? They've actually been really pleasantly surprised by the amount of productivity they've got from people. So I think we'll see a shift in businesses creating more autonomous cultures where they give people more flexibility and more ownership. I think there will be a shift towards more flexible working. I don't believe that. I think some will, but I don't believe that a lot of businesses will remain fully remote. But I think there will be more flexibility around, well, you might want to work from home a couple of days a week and come into the office. There'll be more flex around that. And I think businesses in general will be more open to looking at how do they, the real intrinsic things in the business. Because I think, you mentioned table tennis table. I think that we would call those the surface level culture pieces. And what I think a lot of businesses have realized, that actually they've managed to maintain a lot of elements of their culture without the surface level stuff. And I think they'll focus more on that sort of the human connection element of checking in with their team, taking the time to get everybody together on video. We've heard so many amazing things that businesses have done, that they've really stepped up. One of our clients, one of their directors actually took the time to ring every person in the business that they knew lived on their own through lockdown to do a personal check-in. And it's things like that I think businesses are realizing, that's the stuff that matters. That's the stuff that's going to keep someone at your business, not whether you've got a pool table in the corner. It's that connection piece.
Yeah. So what about your own team then? What's your team consist of, and how do you manage it?
I think we've always been pretty flexible. I think we've always been used to working virtually with clients, because we've got clients in the US and in other places. So that sort of had become commonplace in part of our business. And we've always operated quite flexibly from a perspective of sometimes in the office, sometimes from home. I do quite a bit of traveling. Sarah and I travel back and forth to London to work with clients there. So we've never really had a real sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday office culture. So I don't think that's changed that much. But for us, I mean, even for us, I think that autonomous, ownership-driven culture has elevated. You know, our team have all stepped up in more ways than we could ever have imagined. So I think that's given us the confidence, as it has other businesses, that we've got people in our business that are the right people and that, you know, can do all of the things that we want them to do and more. So I think that that's driven definitely us to look at how do we give more autonomy and more ownership.
And what about Duo in the future? How do you see it? Do you see it just bigger from one unit, or do you see units around the world? Or
we're doing more virtual stuff. When I say virtual stuff, virtual delivery, but also we've actually created, prior to lockdown, we had been talking about creating an online learning element of what we do, and we sort of just hadn't pressed the button. So I think from a growth perspective, we will probably grow more in terms of offering different ways to work with us versus just a face-to-face model, and that will be probably how we grow, versus creating lots of different satellite offices. Actually being able to service more clients from where we are. You know, we have real northeast roots, and I think having lived in a different country, that's a big piece for me, and I know it's a big piece for the team, that the northeast will always be our headquarters. Other offices may come, but currently it's more around how do we service more international businesses from here, and actually how do we give them different options for different experiences. Like we've got a women's leadership program that we started last year, and that's a face-to-face cohort, so it's 6 months, and we do a session a month for our group of women leaders, and it's all driven by you know, women in leadership elevating and running businesses. But actually through lockdown we looked at that and we said there's no reason why we couldn't offer some other options to this. So we've actually designed an online course that someone can go through if they don't want to do a face-to-face course. And then there's also a sort of quasi course where it's delivered virtually, but it's live versus pre-recorded. So things like that, expanding our services, but just looking at how we deliver those in different ways is really probably where our growth will come from.
Yeah. And what about other businesses? Do you follow other entrepreneurs? And is there anybody in particular you're following at the minute?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's looking at businesses that we feel, I mean, it's most of our clients, to be honest. It's looking at, you know, businesses that are doing different things. So as an example, Trend Bible in the Northeast, I know you guys have done quite a bit with Joanna Feely. You know, taking Joanna's business, like she's doing lots of amazing things that are quite similar to what we're looking at. You know, they've created a subscription service. They're doing a lot more sort of productization of their services, and that's the sort of stuff that I see as inspiring. You know, we also work with a lot of corporates that are doing lots of great things, but there's so many, it's those businesses that are looking at ways to innovate and ways to just do things a little bit differently, looking outside of the box, that really sort of inspire me.
Yeah. So would that be your tip for a new business starting up? What would you give it as a tip?
Ooh.
Tip of the week.
Tip of the week. It's so hard when you're limited to one. I think a couple really. One definitely would be find a way to generate recurring revenue. I say that to everybody because that's the success of our business. 85% of our revenue is recurring. And I think that really allows you to invest in growth because you've got cash flow. And I think one lesson we've all learned over the last 6 months is that cash flow is so key. But the other side of cash flow is you've got to have great ideas, and you've got to have realistic, great ideas that people want. We were doing some stuff. Actually, Michael hosted a session with some of the guys from the university, and that's what we were sort of talking about around that. Was it's two things. You know, it's not enough, unfortunately, just to have this amazing idea if there's no market for it. So you've got to be able to make sure that you do some research. You know, that was a big thing for us of asking people what they want. We've just launched a subscription service for HR directors, and we've spent the last 6 months speaking to HR directors and HR managers about what they're missing, what they want. We kind of already knew what we wanted to do, and we could have just launched it, but we didn't have any evidence. So that, have great ideas, have lots of them, but pick the ones that really people want, and then create some sort of model that has recurring revenue.
That sounds good to me. So thank you very much for that. Very interesting stuff, and good luck. And thanks